When my hope and strength is gone, you're the one who calls me on. You are the life, you are the fight that's in my soul.
I was present at the birth of all three of my children, and all of them were beautiful, stressful, miraculous, but they all were individually distinctive. Something was different about each child that came, but there was one constant through all three, and that was my wife. How hard she worked through each one. I can tell you that at the end of each of those days, she was mentally and physically and emotionally drained from the work and the toll that it took on her. Basically accomplishing something that really almost seems impossible. But I can tell you that one thing that she would not have been prepared for that day during labor would be if someone came and attempted to challenge her in a fist fight. This is not what her mind was on, nor was she would have been ready to take that on during that time. But what we see is that as we start Revelation chapter 12 tonight, that's exactly the imagery that John the author gives us when we start into Revelation chapter 12. Now last week we looked at Revelation 10 and 11, how I told you I believe that the two witnesses represent the church and the time of the church and its reach. Well, chapter 12, I think it really kind of speaks to the same thing. But what it does is it almost gives us a little bit of a history lesson for what happened when Christ came and he defeated Satan. So I want you to see how we're starting off here, okay? So follow with me in Revelation chapter 12, verse 1. And it says, "A great sign appeared in heaven. A woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant and crying out in birth pains and the agony of giving birth. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his heads 7 diadems. His tail swept down 1/3 of the stars of heaven and cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that she bore her child and he might devour it. She gave birth to a male child, one who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. But her child was caught up to God and to his throne, and the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God in which she is to be nourished for 1,260 days. Now, let's break this down a little bit, obviously, because we've got women giving birth, we got dragons, and so the imagery that John gives here, okay, is the idea of a woman giving birth, okay? Nothing more vulnerable in the world than a woman during labor. And what we see here, and the opposite side, is it's not just a man or a human or just your regular old lion or anything like that that's coming and threatening her during this time. No, instead we have a 7-headed dragon. All right, one who is vicious. He's got 10 horns on each of his 7 heads and 7 diadems, and a tail that sweeps across it. It says it removes the stars of heaven. And what this is the idea of one that looks absolutely indefensible. And then you have the other that looks like it has the upper hand, and there's no way that this woman is going to get away from this dragon. Think of this if it is on the big screen, all right, at the movie theater. And you have this woman giving birth, all right, middle of the forest, and you all of a sudden have a 7-headed dragon flying in, red, fire breathing, all of this crazy stuff. There is no way that you think that she's getting out of the situation. The dragon has the upper hand. And that is the picture here, because Satan believes he has the upper hand. And notice what happens is the woman has the child, and the dragon is waiting there, waiting in order to devour it. It wants to eat the child. It wants to end and destroy the child. Why? Because what John is writing to us here is the idea of Christ being born. That Satan is there waiting, because he is waiting in order to kill the child, that he might end his reign, that he might end any resemblance that he has of taking over. And when Christ goes to the cross, Satan looks as if he has the upper hand. The followers go and they hide. They are weeping. They are crying. And John here probably in some sense is remembering what he was going through when he looked and he saw Christ hanging on the cross. How Satan believed that he was victorious in it, that he had won. We see this dragon. It seems like all the cards are stacked against the woman, and the dragon is going to be victorious. But here it says that it was caught up to God and to his throne, and the woman fled to the wilderness, all right? Fled away in a place prepared by God. Basically, some protection around this woman that she would not be harmed by the dragon, all right? And what I believe it's talking about, especially when it says being nourished for 1,260 days, the same number of days that we see in chapter 11, all right? And what I believe here is it's speaking about the church when the child is caught up. It's talking about Jesus' death on the cross and then his ascension into heaven, all right? So his death, his resurrection, and then his ascension to take his rightful place on the throne. And here we see that the woman runs off to be protected for a time in a place prepared by God. And so the idea that the age of the church is continuing, I think it's building off of what we saw in chapter 11. Now, let's read on and see what happens to the dragon. So we see that the woman has the child. He is caught up to the throne of God, okay? We see that Satan here now is going to flee after the woman. She is protected in the wilderness by God. The church is protected for a certain time by God as well, all right? We are living, I believe, in that age of the church, that we are protected, and God uses this time to basically further our reach for his kingdom, and he holds Satan, also known as the dragon, at bay right now. Now, read with me in verse 7. Now, when this happened, when Christ ascended into heaven, now war arose in heaven. Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. But he was defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven, and the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. Now, this removes all doubt, question of who this dragon may be. John covers him all the way from Genesis through what we know of him in Revelation. It says he is that ancient serpent, all right, that great deceiver. This is Satan, the devil, whatever you want to call him, it's him. And this is what happens as Christ ascended and a war broke out. Now, you want to think of war and all the footage or the movies that have ever been made, they don't even begin to scratch the surface of what this looked like in heaven. You have Satan and all of his angels. That idea that we read in the first 6 verses where his tail swept and knocked out a third of the stars of heaven, some people believe that it alludes to what we see in Ezekiel or Isaiah, to where it talks about different evil kings, and there's possibly depictions of Satan himself, of where he deceived and he took a third of the angels who were in heaven with him. Basically, that he convinced them to turn on God and try to rebel against him, and they were cast out and thrown out. So here, a war breaks out in heaven with Satan and all of his angels against all of heaven's angels. And it says that they were defeated and they were thrown out of heaven. All right? They were thrown down, not to hell, not to a bottomless pit, but, notice, to earth. All right? To wage war on you and I. All right? Now let's read through and see what else. All right? And I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brothers has been thrown down, who accuses them day and night before our God. And they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. And they love not their lives even unto death. Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. But woe to you, O earth and sea, for the devil has come down to you in great wrath, because he knows that his time is short. So Christ goes to the cross. We can read what we see through the Gospels, okay? And we know that Christ is in the tomb. He stays there for 3 days, and then he comes back to life. He raises a lot of ruckus on earth because he comes back to life. Everybody is trying to figure out, is this real? Is this not real? Some people are making up stories to try to explain it. Other people are seeing him and trying to tell others that it is real. And then 40 days later, we know that first of Acts, end of some of the Gospels, that Jesus ascends into heaven to sit on the throne at the right hand of God. Now, what the Gospels don't do is they tell us a picture of what's going on in heaven. I believe Revelation here is giving us a picture of what happened after Christ ascends to the throne. Because Satan here, at this moment in time, he thinks he defeats Christ on the cross. He puts him up there. He has won. He has devoured him. He has showed that he can conquer the Christ. And as he dies on the cross, when he comes back to life and he ascends into heaven, then Satan, he basically becomes desperate. And I think he rounds up his angels. They go to war in heaven. And it says that they are defeated and that they are cast down. Now notice here, all right, that it says that he comes up and it says he is the accuser of our brothers and that he accuses them day and night. Do you know what happened, or what used to happen, is that Satan would watch mankind and he would see what they were doing wrong, and he would lead them to do things wrong, and he would watch them rebel against God on their own free will. And what he would do is day in, day and night, he would go to heaven and he would speak to God and he would accuse you and I. Look at how they have messed up today. Look at who they are. Look at your creation and how wretched they are. Look at the wickedness, the evil. You aren't perfect, Lord. God, look at what your creation has done. They're awful. And each day he accused us of the sin that we had committed. And told God over and over, they are guilty, they are guilty, they are guilty. Your creation is guilty in front of you. But once Christ died on the cross, he came back to life to show his power. He ascended to take his rightful spot. The war broke out because Satan could no longer accuse mankind. He could no longer accuse you and I. Why? Because salvation had come by the blood of the Lamb. And so he attacks, and Christ takes him and he throws him down to earth. He defeats him and he casts him down. And no more is he allowed to enter into heaven to accuse us of our guilt, of our shame, of our baggage, of our rebellion against God, because the blood of the Lamb has covered it. You see, we have freedom in life now. And it's all because of Christ's conquering blood on the cross. And so he goes back to heaven, and it says that he cast him out. And it says that rejoice those in heaven, because the accuser can no more come back. He can't come up here and point at the people that are now residing with God because of their faith. And he says, but they did this wrong, but they did that wrong. No, they are locked out. They have been cast out and no longer allowed to return, because the blood of the Lamb covers it all. And it covers you and I, all right? And no longer do we have to worry about the baggage and the sin and the rebellion that we have carried up until this point, because the accuser can no longer come and point the finger any longer if we are following the one who shed his blood. And so now that accuser is on earth, and it says, rejoice those of you who are in heaven, because the blood of the Lamb has covered, but woe to you that are on earth, because the devil has been cast down to earth. You know, I've heard that the only thing worse than a live bear, meeting a live bear, is meeting a wounded bear. Many times because they believe that when it's wounded, it feels like it has nothing left to lose, and so it attacks. It doesn't need to be threatened or anything like that. It just simply is mauling. And so I want you to think of that, okay? Of a wounded animal that is rabid, has nothing left to live for, and is really just going about with whatever desire it has. You see, Satan has been cast down to earth, and he's been let loose, knowing his time is short. Notice it ends it. It says, listen, woe to you, O earth and sea, for the devil has come down to you in great wrath. He hasn't come down to just try to live peaceably or try to find his place, all right? Find a cave or something like that, or find just a certain amount of believers that he can teach or take. No, he's come down in great wrath. He's ticked off. He's not happy that he got cast out of heaven. He's not happy that he doesn't have clearance to go accuse anymore. He's not happy that all of a sudden history has been written for him and that God has shown he's in complete control. No, he's come down in great wrath against us. And when he is in great wrath, he knows that his time is short. And so what do when you have no time? You scurry. You hurry. When you've procrastinated to the night before a test or something along those lines, what do the night before? You stay up as long as you can and you are just going 90-0 to try to finish it, right? Well, Satan in the same way has come down with great wrath because he knows his time is running out. And so how much can I mess up? How much can I throw off of God's plan? How many of his believers can I turn away? How many of them can I oppress after they have chosen him? How many can I make ineffective for Christ? He's like a rabid animal who just simply is looking who he may ruin and devour. Nothing that Satan is in charge of flourishes. All his exploits, all of his aim is to tear down the things of God, whether it be in his creation, whether it be in those redeemed by him, those who are thinking about choosing him to be redeemed by him. All he wants to do is tear down, maul, maim, and throw off the things of Christ. In verse 13 we see, "And when the dragon saw that he had been thrown down to earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child. But the woman was given the two wings of the great eagle, so that she might fly from the serpent into the wilderness to a place where she is to be nourished for a time and times and a half a time." All right, speaking to those 3.5 years, those 1,260 days that we saw in those first couple of verses. "And then the serpent poured water like a river out of his mouth after the woman to sweep her away with a flood. But the earth came to the help of the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed the river that the dragon had poured from his mouth. Then the dragon became furious with the woman and went off to make war on the rest of her offspring and those who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus. And he stood on the sand of the sea." And that sets up chapter 13 that we'll look at next week. But I want you to notice here is that all of the dragon's attempts, all of Satan's attempts are being stopped. You see, we started out with this woman giving birth in labor pains and the dragon who seems to have the upper hand. But I want you to notice that God uses this imagery and he gives to John. He wants John to see this because God, coming in the form of a vulnerable baby, defeated the seven-headed dragon. Do you ever feel like in your life that Satan has the upper hand, that the cards are just stacked against you? That there's nothing that you can do to overcome, that it seems like you just keep getting punched every time you try to get up? You're depressed, you're lonely, you are confused, you're frustrated. Believe me, I've been there. But what I want you to see here is the reason that those things just keep piling in is because Satan is furiously trying to tear down or seek vengeance or seek retribution on what he feels like he's been wronged on. You see, what we have to remember, what we have to rely on is that no matter what plans he comes, no matter how he tries to throw the world into a frenzy or upside down, that God is victorious on the other side. And each attempt that he tries is foiled. Even when God throws down the seven-headed dragon through the birth of a child. God is great beyond our recognition. He exceeds our expectations. He needs very little help from us, but yet he commands, demands, asks us, gives us the privilege of serving him. You see, our unit purpose, what I want us to grab hold tonight, the thing I want us to be able to pull from chapter 12 is that Christ has silenced our accuser. He is allowed us to carry forward his mission in freedom. In Jonah, I want to end with this illustration. I want you to go back to Jonah for a second. And if you remember, Jonah goes through the streets and he's pronouncing judgment that's coming on Nineveh. Well, the king of Nineveh, once he hears the judgments that are coming, it says that he clothed himself in sackcloth, he sat down in ashes, and he said, "Let us commit basically to prayer and to the Lord, and maybe, just maybe, he will relent from the anger that he's about to pour out on us." All right? And so he decides that they are going to serve the Lord and hope that God relents. You see, we have been given a much greater privilege and a much greater mission because we are able and given the mission to be able to serve God knowing that we have freedom from our sin, from our rebellion. No longer can someone accuse us when we have the blood of Christ covering us. We are able to be free in our redemption and free in our service. No longer do we serve without the idea or understanding that we will have Christ in the end. He is our prize. Rejoice, O heavens. And when we have trusted in Christ and we join him in heaven, we can rejoice because the accuser has been locked out. He has been cast down. He is no longer there to try to accuse us and point out our guilt because it is covered by the blood of the Lamb. Oh, I hope that you understand and that you know the power of the blood tonight. That you know that Christ has died for you, that he came back to life, and that he has ascended and he is king at this moment. I pray that if you don't have that knowledge, that you contact us, that you contact someone that told you about this video, Find a way to message someone that you know is in church or is a follower of Christ and have a conversation. I pray that you understand the freedom in which that you can live in. But that's all I have for tonight. I pray that you understand how great the blood of the Lamb is, how powerful it is, and I pray that you live in that power tonight and from here on out. You have a great night, and we'll see you next time.